I was asked to do this about a week ago. We had a preacher from Toronto came down to help us try to get into young people to our church. And he asked me how I got to be in this congregation. And I can tell you, I'm not like Elijah. No one whispered to me. But I know he was there. And the reason I'm going to tell you the story, you may think it was just a teenage illusion, but I saw it and I'll take it to my grave. And how it happened, my dad and mom, my dad was a steel worker. He never went to church except for weddings and funerals. But his sister lived behind us. She was a spinster's aunt, and she ran the Sunday school. So us four siblings were dressed up. Off we walked to church. And that's how I started in the church. I was just, 10 or 12. Anyway, one day, we lived on a dead-end street known as a hill. I was walking down the hill. Now this is what I say, you may think I'm a strange teenager, but I can still remember it had cumulonimbus clouds. A lot of you don't know what they are. My pilot background, I know what they were. Anyway, there were nice bright clouds, but off to the side of this bright cloud was a dark cloud. And I looked at it, and I thought was the Lord. It was an image I'll never forget. I could see his hair, I could see his beard, his face. He had a long robe, and he had a shepherd's cross and a shaft in his hand with a curved, and it never spoke to me. It was there, and I stopped in the tracks. And from that, and I used to go to United Church, and that's where my aunt was, and we used to have service in the morning, and we used to have service at night. And can you imagine a teenager showing up at church in the morning and church in the evening? I was the only one in my family that did it. And that's how I started in the church. I married my wife. She was a Presbyterian, and we ended up when we came to Kingston, we went to the little church. A lot of people don't know it's a church, but as you go towards Bath, there's a bridge there. And I guess years ago, before my time, or our time, it was called the Floating Bridge, because I guess the bridge at that time was floating. And there was a little church. It's not too far past the Floating Bridge, as I call it, and it was a Presbyterian church. And I backtrack. It was United Church. And so we started to go there. But like a lot of churches, the attendance dropped and dropped and dropped. And the last day, I think there was only 4 people, the minister and the piano player, and that was it. Then they closed it. So I ended up following Grace to this church. And I've been overwhelmed by the friendliness of this congregation. And that's why I'm here today, because of the friendliness of this group. But just to tell you a few of the stories that I told this minister, when I was a pilot, as a captain of the airline, I was a pilot for 35 years for Air Canada. And I can honestly tell you, I'm one of the few pilots that flew for 35 years and never saw an engine shut down. And whether that was whispering from above, I have no idea. But I can tell you, every time I took off, I used to fly at 2 engines, 3 engines, and 4 engines. Every time I took off, I pushed that power up to start the right takeoff run. I'd always say, Lord, keep my passengers safe. And he obviously did. Just a few of I'll give you 2 little stories. I was flying into New York on a DC-9, and New York was overcast. And we were directed by air traffic control. We descended through the cloud, and then I came across this strange cloud that was down below. And I happened to look to the one side, and here it was 3 aircraft that were skywriting. And I 15 seconds, maybe even 10 seconds later, we would have been a mishap. In those days, aircraft were required to have what we call a transponder. And the transponder, the thing that it did, it could record where everybody was in the area and what altitude. But they didn't have it in this particular day. This was well before the transponders came in. One of the other stories, I'll just do this one and that'll be it. I was in Los Angeles, San Francisco on a layover. I had flown down as the captain, and then coming back, the first officer was flying. And that's the way we trained our first officers. We would do one leg and they would do the other, and of course we would have, the say when everything happened. Anyway, he was flying, and it was on a 767, and the 767 was, at the time, was a fantastic aircraft. If it was the load was light, and conditions were right, we could get right up to 41,000 feet. And we were going to Toronto, and I thought we can get up there. We'll be able to fly pretty well direct to Toronto, and we won't have to follow the airway. So that was the plan. We got up there, and we asked air traffic control for direct flight to Toronto, and he said, we can't do it right now. We have some American Air Force jets that were flying around. So they said, try it about 15 to 20 minutes down the road type thing. We might give you a direct. And anyway, we were flying the airway, and the FO was flying it, and I was doing the radios and all that sort of thing. And air traffic control came on and said, Air Canada, I can't remember the number now, you're 7 miles off course. And on our radar, we have a weather radar, and it goes from 30, you can set it for 30 miles, 150 miles, 350 miles. And when we're flying, we usually fly it at 350 miles to check out weather and thunderstorms and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, I said to the first officer, you bring us back on course. So he tried to bring us back on course, and he couldn't. We have 3 autopilots in the 767, and so I said to the FO, use my autopilot, my side, which he tried, and he tried to get back, nothing. Well, try the center one, and nothing. And anyway, he said to me, you have control, Captain. So we carry, you'll see every pilot carrying a briefcase. In that briefcase, we have what they call a QRH. That is, if any step goes wrong in the aircraft, you're to bolt things out of your flight bag, and there's steps to follow. Do this, do this, do this. And it's steps for everything. So we got the thing open, and the steps said, take the control column. If you've ever seen pilots, the captain has his and the co-pilot has his. They're identical, but they're separate. So the theory was, according to QRH, it said 60 pounds of pull to break away from the other side. And here's where God came in. I didn't want to do that. I said, why would 3 autopilots fail? And said, if I break away from that and I do 60 pounds, what happens if it freezes there? We're in deep trouble. We're just doing circles. And so I said, no, we're not going to do that. So I thought about it for a bit with the help. And I asked, well, I didn't ask him, but I was talking to him very quickly. I needed help, Lord. So what I thought about, in San Francisco, we had a heavy, heavy rain that night. And we were one of the first departures of San Francisco. And I figured because we went from almost 20 degrees to 35 degrees right up to 41,000, which is minus 60, I thought, is it possible that we have frozen the control columns? Meanwhile, I'm flying the aircraft. If anybody had a little boat, you can steer the boat for the rudder. Well, that's what I had, a rudder. And that's the only control I had, was a little switch to control this rudder so we can go left and right. Anyway, going on the story, I thought about it, and so that's what we're going to do. Don't touch anything. I asked the FAO to get me some landing turns into Denver, and then I thought, no, don't want Denver. We'll go to Salt Lake City. Denver is in the mountains, and it could be turbulence, and I didn't want to fly the aircraft on a little trim switch. So we got Salt Lake City. So then they agreed to that, air traffic control, and they gave us a heading into it. And I thought some more about it, and I thought, well, what happens if we get down below 10,000 feet? And once you're below 10,000 feet, you're not allowed to fly any more than 250 knots. It's the rule. So I thought, if we get down below 10, and I fly the aircraft, what I used to call the clacker speed, it's right up to its max speed, that maybe, if the controls are frozen, maybe by getting down to 10, you're hitting the air and you're heating the aircraft as it strikes the warm air, you're heating it. Anyway, flying into there, we came to the downwind position. I had all the emergency vehicles were all out on the runway and everything. And coming down here, didn't the first officer's control come free? And then shortly mine came free. Now we're committed to land in Denver because we used up a lot of fuel. So we landed in Denver, and the I think at that time it was TWA mechanics that looked after us, and they couldn't find anything. And my chief pilot called me from Toronto and said, John, what's your plan? And I said, well, we'll take the passengers to Toronto, and I know what if it happens again, I know what to do. And of course it didn't happen again, and off we went to Toronto, and the passengers, no one ever got off. They all stayed on. They trusted me, I guess, or up to the airline, whatever. And so that's my story. I think the Lord had a lot to help in my decisions. And anyway, to get on with my story from the floating bridge, we came here, and it's been my family since. Thank you.
Thank you.